Welcome back to the Tamarack Sew-Along. If you're planning patch pockets for your Tamarack, today is for you. I'll be walking you through the process of assembling, quilting, and attaching your patch pockets. So without further ado, let's get sewing. For your patch pockets, you'll have cut piece 4, which is the top pocket bag. And you'll have cut that out of your main fabric, your batting, and your lining. Start by laying out the main fabric face up, and then over top of that, you're going to lay out your lining fabric face down. So the right sides are together. We're going to pin across the top edge. And then we're going to head to our machine and we're going to sew across this top edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm back tacking just a few stitches. Now we need to press the seam allowance towards the lining. There you can see, press towards the lining. Now we need to understitch along the seam line through the lining and both layers of seam allowance. Now we need to press along that top seam, and you're going to want to make sure that all of the lining rolls to the inside so you don't see it on the front of your pocket. Now take the piece you cut out of the batting and we're going to trim a 1/4 inch off the top. That's the amount that we took off when we sewed our seam. Take your pocket, open it up, and then you're going to lay your batting so that the top edge falls into the seam and the bottom edges align. Then fold the top edge back over and make sure everything is nice and smooth. Now we need to quilt our pocket as we did with our jacket. So I'm drawing in my quilting lines. And this piece is very small, so I'm just going to pin baste it. Now continue by quilting as you did for your jacket, recreating the same or a complementary pattern. Once your pocket is quilted, you're going to stitch around the outside edge as we did for our jacket pieces. After that's complete, we're going to just go around and trim any batting that overhangs the pocket. We get a nice, neat edge that way. Now we need to bind the outside of our pocket edge. To do this, grab a strip of binding that is long enough to go around the edge of your pocket and unfold it. What we're going to do is the right side of the pocket and the binding together. We're going to start pinning that in place. You don't want to stretch because we don't want to gather our pocket. Just lay it down nicely. And if you're really comfortable applying binding, you can do this at the machine without pinning. But I want to show you this method because if you're comfortable enough to do that, you probably don't need me to demo this. So at the corner, we're going to just turn. We don't want to pull because that will gather our corners in. So just manipulate the binding around the corner. Make sure you don't have any tucks or puckers along the seam line. Continue across the bottom. Then again, we're going to round the corner without pulling on the binding. And then up to the top. So now we're going to head over to our machine and we're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that will be in this ditch created by the first fold of your binding. We're just going to sew from one side around the corner back up. All right, so again, 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is that first stitch. I am going to back tack here. Now, as you get into the corner, you may need to pick your foot up just to rearrange things a bit and make sure you're not sewing any tucks in. And of course, if you do sew in any tucks, you can always fix those later. Just going to move that over a tiny bit. You see, I use a pin a lot. Just helps me get into the small corners. A lot of people use a bodkin for that. I don't have one, so this is what I use. right up to the top. Now we're going to press the binding away towards the edge. Flip your pocket over, and you're going to unfold that second fold. We're going to press the binding around the edge of the pocket. Making sure you don't curl your edges. I can see how this looks on the front. This side I haven't quite folded along the edge of the pocket, so you can see the binding's a little wider. So I'm just going to go back in and re-fold and press. And that looks a lot better. Everything is nice and even. Could roll this out a slight bit. There we go. So now we have these raw edges at the top and we need to deal with those. So what we're going to do is just trim off the top. Fold the raw edge down. And then fold the binding back over and press. I'm going to stick a pin in there just to keep it in place while I work on the other side. Again, I'm going to trim, fold it down, and fold it over. So our next step will be attaching the pocket to your jacket. And to do that, what I like to do is stitch along the outside, come up, turn, and then stitch along the inside. That not only gives a little extra reinforcement here at this stress point, but it's going to enclose the raw edge. So what we need to do to make sure that encloses the raw edge is we need to trim our binding so it falls within the seam allowance here. So basically we're just trimming off that extra 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, sorry. Now, if you made binding that was 1.5 inches wide, you wouldn't need to trim, but I like to make all my binding at once, so I just trim this off. And just make sure you can see the seam line here, so when we stitch along it, it will be caught. Trim a little bit more in the corner. And it just makes a really nice clean pocket inside, which I personally really like. This is a lot easier to do when you're not trying to angle it for the camera rather than your wrist. All right, so now we have that trimmed. We need to grab our front. Okay, so here we have my pocket placement markings. I'm going to take my pocket and I'm just going to center it with those two markings. Remove my placement pins, and then I'm just going to pin my pocket in place. Make sure it's still folded nicely. And at the top edge, make sure everything is tucked and your raw edges aren't peeking out. Now I'm just going to pin 2 pins in the center to keep it aligned, just, I don't know, in case anything shifts. What I'm going to do is start in one of the corners. I'm going to stitch down along the edge of the binding, around to the other side. I'm going to pivot over, and then I'm going to stitch down along the inside. That way your pocket will be very secure and the raw edge of the binding will be trapped inside. Okay, so starting at a top corner, I am going to back tack. Take it nice and slow around the curve. It's really easy to stitch off the edge of the curve. And we don't want to do that. And here as we approach the top, you can see everything's tucked under nicely. So stitch up to the corner, move my pins. And you're going to lift your presser foot and you're going to pivot. Across the top, pivot again. make sure, it's going to be a little awkward to turn the inside corner, so you might want to roll your jacket up. Then again, as we approach the top, we're just going to make sure this is properly tucked under. Pivot. And that's it. And now here we have a beautifully attached patch pocket. You can see on the inside your raw edges are concealed. And all you need to do is repeat this for the other front. All right, our pocket is complete. Repeat these steps for your other pocket, and then you'll be all ready to start assembling your jacket. In our next few lessons, we'll be sewing up our jackets to the point where you'll need to either add the collar, hood, or stick with the original pattern. We'll be attaching our collars and assembling our hoods, so get your pockets in or attached, and I'll see you back here for those lessons. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And as always, make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss any of our video lessons. I'll see you back here next time. Bye-bye.